everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of UWC Mostar podcast. As our first guest, we have one and only Dženan Hakalović, who has been with the school for years and years. And the topic we're going to cover today is basically UWC Mostar and everything it connects to. And yeah, so Dženan, could you introduce yourself for a bit?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I think it's a pleasure and an honor actually to participate in your podcast. So my name is Dženan Hakalović. I currently teach history, global politics, also theory of knowledge, and I also happen to be the head of the department for Group 3 Humanities at the college.
Thank you so much. So for our questions, we prepared several. So when it comes to the idea of opening UWC Mostar, how did that come from, and where did that come from actually? What is the kind of history behind it since it opened in 2006?
Okay, so I mean, well, I wasn't technically kind of involved from the very start. It was made very clear actually to us, me joining actually back in 2007, that the context of opening college in a kind of post-conflict country, but also a city that is being described as divided, was the essential driver or kind of motivation behind the actual opening of the college back in 2006. The whole story kind of started earlier, so obviously it has to do a lot with the idea of the UWC movement to actually establish colleges in the places where there are some kind of political and social issues that might be relevant. So it was very much connected to UWC Adriatic, its own position as being the college that was opened in the immediate neighborhood of what used to be at the time Yugoslavia, and with this kind of idea of connecting students from the wider kind of Mediterranean, South European region across the sort of Cold War divide. So back in the 80s when they established college, they had that in mind as well. Through the 90s, of course, as the war in Yugoslavia kind of broke out, they also started, they were like in the immediate neighborhood, so the idea of actually kind of getting in students from the former Yugoslav republics and playing an important role in terms of kind of supporting the communities in the immediate neighborhood of the Adriatic College was one of the driving, I think, kind of forces for the college itself. And so it was no surprise actually that at the time, the principal of the college, late David Sutcliffe, actually kind of also came up very much with the idea of establishing close cooperation with other schools in the region. One of them was the second gymnasium in Maribor, actually, which happened to be the first IB school opened in former Yugoslavia as well. And it was after, I think, his retirement, if I remember correctly, together with the alumna of the college, Dr. Pilvi Torsti, actually, who's currently, of course, the chair of our foundation board, and late Antonin Bess, a person who was instrumental in kind of supporting the colleges, including the UWC Atlantic, in its early years, through kind of his philanthropic, efforts. And so the three of them kind of coming together with the idea of maybe, using this experience of colleges, both UWC Atlantic, but even more so UWC Adriatic, to actually establish a school in a place that might really benefit from it. So the initial idea, I think, already came like in the late 90s and the early 2000s. They already started kind of working on the realization. And interestingly, actually, the first option was really Sarajevo. Actually, it's kind of like the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a place that in many ways would be more convenient because of the international organizations, embassies, but also a lot of kind of public property and space where such a school would be easier to establish. And if I remember correctly, actually the initial idea was really to have kind of a typical UWC, very close campus, probably somewhere on the outskirts of the city, etc. And then somehow kind of within those discussions, Mostar came up as a really interesting place because of its political situation, which a few years after the war was not too changed, in the sense that it was still felt as a city that was deeply divided, politically. And so the initiative kind of, at the beginning was very much part of the broader UWC IBU cooperation. Even the actual initial initiative was called UWC IBO initiative. And so we started off with opening IB schools. Before UWC Mostar, of course, there was also Druga Gimnazija, so the second gymnasium in Sarajevo actually that started their IB program. and at the same time when the deliberation about the creation of college started, they also opened an IB program in Gimnazia Banja Luka, actually. So it was kind of part of the common effort to establish IB presence in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also like with the help of UWC. And so it took some time, of course, to come to the realization, and eventually, of course, in 2006, college was officially open. But it took a lot of effort from many people who have been involved there from the very start. So the ideation and the actual development itself took probably like, between 5 and 10 years.
Oh, so it's a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you have not been to school since the very beginning. So for how long have you been with the school? What's your experience? You've been the principal as well. So how did that go?
So yeah, it was kind of an interesting story in many ways because I joined actually in 2007. I saw the ad basically, like, which was posted online, about a job opening for a history teacher at an international school in Mostar. And honestly, I was kind of curious about it. I was also looking for a job, so it wasn't really like I didn't know much about the college at the time. But I decided to kind of give it a try. I wasn't really suitable to be kind of hired because I was so straight from college. I had very little teaching experience. They were looking for somebody with at least 3 years teaching experience at the time, but I applied nevertheless. So kind of I like to joke, of course, it's a whole risk taking. It's part of the IB learner profile. I think sometimes you just have to kind of take certain risks. So what I felt was that I wouldn't mind kind of giving it a try. Maybe teaching in such an environment would be a good experience. I was invited for the interview. I was very clearly explained at the start that I don't qualify because I don't have the minimum 3 years experience that actually the ad was requesting. And so the first question was like, why did you apply since you don't really kind of qualify? I was like, well, I have very little to lose, so I, even if I'm not accepted, of course, having a job interview is always pleasant, not a pleasant, but like a very useful experience, I'd say. So I was invited actually to become a teacher trainee, rather than a full-time teacher, and so it was quite an interesting thing. I didn't really know what to expect. We didn't even talk financial implications of that. I was offered a post as a kind of like a part-time teacher trainee and a part-time house parent. So I kind of joined in 2006. So while technically I wasn't there from the very beginning, I kind of we made this agreement for me to start actually like in 2007 in September. And I joined initially in my first year. As suggested, I was a house parent in one of the residences. I was also not really teaching full time, but I was more like preparing, kind of helping the 2 other history teachers to kind of prepare classes, a bit like a TEA, like a teaching assistant, and so I did a lot of that. I was still involved in EEs, so I had 4, if I remember correctly, EEs that I supervised. I had a project week, I did CAS, so I kind of I did lots of things, but I wasn't full-time teaching. So it was only in 2008 that I started kind of as a full-time teacher.
So it was close enough.
It was after a year, so initially my kind of contract was extended, it was initially 6 months, so I'm based on 1 term, and then after that it was extended for another term, and then I was offered a full-time contract for a year, and then it kind of got prolonged, and from there it just kind of happened that like every year there would be something new really. So I was teaching initially history, then I started teaching TOK at some point. Then we introduced the subject called Peace and Conflict Studies, so it was kind of offered to me because it's sort of an interdisciplinary one, so it sort of includes all these varieties. So in the meantime, I was involved in CAS. I was kind of like a CAS coordinator assistant. I actually became what at the time was called curriculum coordinator, which is basically what the director of studies is. So I was involved in subject selection, scheduling, all these kind of work that actually relate to academic. I was also head of department for Group 3 for years, and then like eventually I became an acting head in 2019. Very, I would say, accidentally, because there was kind of a sudden opening actually that had to be filled. So I was kind of asked to take care of the post for the remainder of the term because it happened actually in March, so I was there supposed to stay there for until basically August, but then it was extended for another year until we finally had. And in the meantime, COVID started. So I kind of, instead of half a year, I stayed for 2.5 years actually, throughout the COVID pandemic. And so it was a bit unusual kind of headship, I think, in many ways, but also an interesting experience. So yeah, I mean, I've spent almost 18 years at the school, so through the time I kind of I've done all sort of things that you could possibly do.
Yeah. So speaking of unusual as your process was, UWC Mostar is very specific by itself, very unusual school. So what do you think that makes UWC Mostar very specific, apart from the open campus, since we are basically the first school with a directly open campus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, of course, we always highlight that sort of open campus setting is an important aspect of the whole integration process. And creates a lot of difficulties, of course, but at the same time, it does play an important role in what we felt was the kind of strong point, and that is to have that presence of a kind of international community, diverse community in all diversity kind of ways you can think of, in a city that has been in the process of healing and peace building. So that our contribution somehow could be not maybe always through active involvement in the peace building efforts as much as just kind of creating a model and slowly kind of getting to sort of normalize contact and cooperation among young people, etc. So I think we started off from looking at our CAS program and looking at Project Week and looking at the interactions with the local community as very important, and in many ways, if not more, but equally important as the academic part itself. And so I think we made a main feature of our school, and that obviously, so many years after the Yugoslav wars and war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in particular, I mean, you might think that there's very little to do when it comes to peace building, but actually the process is still there, and the situation has changed. But for us, I think we stay very much committed to that role of being, in some way, that kind of as they like to say, lighthouse. To be that point of orientation, for people to say, okay, well, you see, it actually can work. It's possible. And so I like to think that we've done a good job when it comes to that. But there's still a long road ahead.
Yeah, and exactly what I was about to ask about the entire road of UWC Mostar. So what would you say are some similarities or differences from the beginning, or the first years of opening and receiving young people, internationals, compared to what it looks like today and what it feels like today? So what are some things that have improved, or maybe you find very significant that changed?
No, I think a lot actually has changed. My kind of feeling is that at the start, I mean, one thing actually we were not aware when we started was, of course, the kind of limited financial resources the school actually initially had. So we were informed eventually, down the road, that the money was kind of allocated for a 3-year project, and then beyond that point, actually the school might not continue. So it was this kind of probably the most critical period in the history of the school was actually when after 3 years there was this idea to close it, and so it was rough in that many ways. Initially, I think we had enough finance to really kind of support all sort of projects. In terms of staffing, we were able to hire more international staff because the salary cap was also different. So in many ways, also this kind of founding staff, was largely international with some local, many of whom were not really experienced teachers, but somebody who, like me, kind of just was about to start. And so that was one major difference, I think. And the facilities, because of that temporary nature of the college, there was, I think, very little thought was given to the to kind of creating own space that would be owned by the school and would be actually, in terms of its financial implications, would actually save money. So there's a lot of money was actually spent on renting out places, and we're still kind of there in some way, but I think we're moving out of this arrangement, progressively and try to have more and more spaces that we can actually call our own. So which I see as a major difference, really. And so we've been through kind of thick and thin. I think facility-wise, many things have improved in the meantime.
You see the residences?
The canteen, even the teaching space. I remember when we joined, I did my own kind of a practice class. So I had this sort of a practice class that I had to do, in front of the school principal and another history teacher. And I remember very clearly, I did it in the chemistry lab, because at the time college only had the 3 labs and actually the dispatch room. So the only 4 rooms that the college used. So in my first year, there was this process of reconstruction of the gymnasia, kind of classrooms. Then in the next year, we started using village. Then maybe 4th year, we stopped using village building. So we were using all kind of facilities around. There was a lot of improvisation. I was mentioning this building, the Red Cross building, also being used for classes for years. And so we have more space now. We still miss many of these premises that would really make our life easier. But I think overall it has been a tremendous progress when it comes to what we have. I think there was always this idea that we are not to become some kind of a posh, elite school in terms of our premises, because you also don't want to alienate yourself from the local community.
Yeah.
So you want to be more relatable in that sense. So I don't think there's ever going to be a point where we're going to be the fancy UWC, like some of our sister schools really are. But I think that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be more
very grounded and
exactly.
very immersed into the local community and understanding what does it feel like to live in such an environment. And you were talking a lot about changes and tremendous changes that happened. But when it comes to the challenges of the school itself, what would you consider a big challenge the school, for example, faces today, apart from gaining more facilities and more people and students?
I think it's probably 2 things. So one is how do we kind of how do we remain relevant in the local context? So as the local context kind of changes, we are not the only ones kind of that deal with these big ideas of peace building and reconciliation in the local community. So we need to in some ways diversify. And I think we started kind of thinking about what are the other pressing issues that we need to kind of address. How can we be involved with some environmental concerns locally? How can we kind of think about some human rights, issues, around the local community, etc. So there are all these other things that we see some space where we can use our own experience, and also the fact that we do have 200 students plus the staff, so they would have that human resource that could be helpful, in supporting some local causes that are really worthy of attention and support. So I think we kind of went through that process of reimagining or rethinking about what is exactly that we're supposed to do. We started with these flashy ideas of how do we reform the local educational system, etc. And so when you mentioned actually the challenges, I think this kind of translates into that idea of realizing that one of our challenges remains, of course, the fact that we are technically a private school, and so therefore we have our voice when it comes to these big transformational processes, when it comes to school, like reform of the education, high schools, etc., still fairly limited. So there's only as much as we can do as a single school. So I think it took us years to kind of, in a way, to prove ourselves in front of the local institutions and to get acknowledged and accepted as somebody who's really trying their best to kind of contribute to the local educational kind of space, if you want. And the challenge remains, of course, that whatever in terms of political developments around the country, whatever happens, we're somehow affected. So if there's like some kind of political deadlock or a crisis or whatever, like it influences our work as well. So it depends on how much can we reach out to different schools, to different communities around the country. So it's all very dependent on the situation. And we've experienced that ourselves. Like throughout the years, there were these ups and downs in terms of relations with particular ministries in different cantons and different entities, so who's the minister, which political party. So it's like these kind of complex politics of Bosnian
Yeah.
Herzegovina, they kind of affect our life as well in many ways. But I think we've learned some lessons and we're managing it fairly well now.
Yeah, yeah. So we talked a lot about the past and the past experiences, but now let's move to the future for a bit and see what do you think Mostar will look like, or UWC Mostar will look like in the future? Whether it's goals or some of the aims, or in general, like where would you love to see it?
No, I think, I kind of know where the path was leading throughout the years, and I do have that kind of understanding that, like, we're to stay on that path, probably for the time being, and it has to do, of course, with our own kind of, development of our own facilities, so having a stronger kind of footing in the local community, resolving some of these, technical problems, if you want, the school experiences when it comes to lack of facilities, etc. So it's going to be like one of those short-term or kind of, medium-term plans for sure. As it gradually gets resolved, what you also gain from it is more, basically more financial capabilities when it comes to, supporting some ideas and projects within the school. So it all is very much connected to that. And we'll remain committed, of course, to educational excellence in the sense of, like, what the IB UWC combination can really offer to local schools. We do workshops with local teachers. We kind of participate in local educational programs and conferences. We work on establishing strong networks with civil society organizations. I think we're moving now into the direction of really supporting, again, as I mentioned earlier, local projects wherever we can. So what I see really is that, we continue kind of down that path. We keep an eye on what changes in terms of the local sentiments and what are the pressing issues of today, and we adapt. So we don't stick blindly to what we assume the school is going to focus on, but we kind of adapt to the local needs. So somehow we become really the integral part of the local community even more. And for the college kind of future, I do really see that in that sense that it becomes sort of stable and solid. Financially, of course, that means also ability to provide full scholarships beyond what we offer right now, and to kind of have the ability to hire also teachers, without kind of considering the financial restrictions of that, and so all of these aspects that are really that could improve the works of the school, but in the same time for the school to be able to offer more, to the local community. So I do see that happening, down the road. I think we've been through some of the roughest periods, so far. I mean, you never know, but I do kind of see that, like, it can only go up from here, really.
So you mentioned a lot of things about local community and us kind of being there as a role model. So how do you see the significance of international school in the local community, as kind of the last question of today?
No, I think it's a very important one in the sense, like, of our own understanding of why are we here and what can we do, and so I think we had we sort of maybe started on a wrong foot in a way, that we came in and there was a little bit of, I think, attitude of, okay, we're here to improve things, which you may understand, of course, doesn't always work very well. So local community did not necessarily receive it very well. I mean, it was a bit maybe condescending or arrogant from our side to expect that we are somehow kind of, in a position to teach or to instruct somebody how to do things. And it took us time to realize that we're actually closing certain doors and we're not really allowing ourselves to do enough, because it was always us. We're starting new projects, we're doing these, we're inviting people to join our own initiatives, our own programs, our own projects. And then eventually I think we realized that there's so many good things happening already, and that actually if we are to actually support some of those causes and some of those programs ourselves, we can do so much more. So that networking and a bit more humility, I would say, kind of modesty, is really would change our own attitudes. And I think it will also help the local community to accept us better, not as some kind of a foreign entity of this sort of like a closed bubble,
Yeah.
but actually an integral part of the city. It took years. It was really tough. I think in some periods of time, in terms of perceptions, for the local community is yet another international project that is probably doomed to fail, because many, especially post-war, post-war kind of work with international organizations and NGOs, from the local community perspective, looked like a waste of kind of resources.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think we've passed that phase, which I'm really glad, because it was not a nice one. And now we're more in the phase where we can really, we can be there to support what is already in place.
Yeah.
And so whether it's like our students kind of volunteering at the half marathon, which is an amazing event, or supporting the street art festival, which we helped to kind of start, but then we took a back seat and let it on its own. And so those kind of initiatives, which are already amazing, which are already great, where we really don't have to be in the driving seat, right? And so I feel like this is where actually like we should be, and I think with that we can really somehow prove to ourselves as well, to the community, that we are relevant, and then we can play an important role in this long and painful process of kind of bringing the city together.
And to kind of offer the inspiration and motivation for integration and for the engagement. And so far from what we see in the students is that kind of we're getting closer and closer to being very relevant to the local community, and that's what we are constantly trying to do with everything that we do, including MUN conference and including project weeks, and kind of constantly making some collaborations. So I think we definitely passed the phase, as you mentioned, where we're kind of the outsiders. I think we're kind of approaching more and more to actually be the insiders, to be accepted completely by the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're more appreciated than ever before, which I think is an amazing thing, and I just think actually that really the kind of modesty and humility really is the key, in that sense. So just being aware of the fact that at the end of the day we are a school, right? So we're not there to solve kind of local problems and to save the local community from itself, but actually to be the citizens, and to kind of do what the other citizens do, is like to use whatever skill and kind of time and energy they have to slowly try to make some things move forward. That's pretty much what we can do, and I think if we kind of stick to that, I think only sky is the limit.
Yeah, and bringing us closer to the UWC mission and
Absolutely.
the UWC values that we are kind of all here for.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, and that will be it for today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you everyone for watching. My name is Majkić. I was your host for today, and see you in the next episode.